Welcome to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. I'm Tamara Kandaker. So when the pandemic hit last year, businesses had to shut down almost overnight. And the federal government launched a wave of emergency spending to help people and companies get through the economic crisis. The biggest part of that spending, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, also known as CEWS. It's actually one of the most expensive government programs in our history. And for many businesses, it was a lifeline. Thousands of struggling restaurants, salons, gyms, and small companies signed up. But a lot of bigger companies also got money from the program. And while they did see a drop in revenues as the economy came back, some companies turned things around and ended up having a great year. So how much money did those companies get? That's what my colleagues at the Globe have been investigating for months.
There were about 2 to 3 hedge funds that had, the best year they've had in a long while. They won awards. Their returns were, almost 30% in a year. And they received the subsidy.
Vanmala Subramaniam is the capital markets reporter for the Globe. She's one of the reporters who worked on this investigation and wrote a story about the hedge funds that benefited. And she's here to break it down for us. Today on The Decibel, how companies that didn't need help managed to qualify for the wage subsidy program, how they used that money, and are they going to give it back? Let's get into it. Van, welcome to The Decibel.
Thanks for having me, Tamara.
Your findings on hedge funds and asset management companies are part of a much bigger investigation that you worked on with our colleagues, Pat Breathauer, David Milstead, and Tom Cardoso on the wage subsidy program, and found that many Canadian companies were able to collect wage subsidies even though they saw their incomes go up. So how did you guys start investigating this? What is the origin story of this investigation?
So Patrick Breathauer, our tax and fiscal policy reporter, I credit him a lot because it was his idea to kind of start looking into this program. And what he noticed was that over time, 2 things were happening. The pandemic hit, the economy was bad in the April, May, June. The economy started recovering. Yet the number of companies claiming the wage subsidy and the cumulative amounts that were being claimed was just going up and up and up. And so what we thought was we really need to account for where this money is going. And, this would have been a very, very easy task if the government had simply disclosed it. They have all that information. They could actually just give you a list of companies and all of the money that they have dispensed. And remember, this is taxpayer money. It's public money. And they didn't. All they had was the names of the companies and not the amounts. So we basically pulled up a list of all the recipients of the wage subsidy that were listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Toronto Venture Exchange. And we found that there were 388 public companies that had received the subsidy. And cumulatively, they had received more than $3.6 billion in payments. And we found that some of the biggest names in corporate Canada were on that list. So Air Canada, Bell, SNC-Lavalin, Suncor Energy. And more importantly, we found that almost half of the companies that we analyzed actually were profitable in 2020.
Okay, so let's start with hedge funds. According to your reporting, many of the top performing hedge funds got help from the government in 2020 through the wage subsidy program. So tell me about that. How many of these hedge funds qualified to get the wage subsidy?
I managed to pull up a list of about 300 asset managers in this country. And that includes hedge funds. It includes publicly listed wealth management companies, Franklin Templeton, CI Financial being the big 2. And I found from those 300 names, at least 80 asset managers, so, all classes of asset managers, received the wage subsidy. Now, a lot of these companies are private, so you don't know how much they received, and the government doesn't disclose amounts. But a couple of names really stood out to me. there were about 2 to 3 hedge funds that had, the best year they've had in a long while. They won awards. Their returns were, almost 30% in a year. And they received the subsidy.
And tell me specifically about this one company, Time Low Investment Management, Inc. What was its financial situation when it got the wage subsidy?
Time Low Investment Management, Inc., a small hedge fund, manages about $400 million. A lot of high net worth investor clients. They're based out of Montreal and they received the wage subsidy. I don't know how much, they didn't disclose it, but they posted returns of almost 30% in 2020. And that's very big. And, in an interview, the founder of this company, Jean-François Tardif, who basically manages the fund, in an interview he did with Bloomberg, he said that really the company had a very good year. He admitted it. He said, we took advantage of market turbulence and we positioned ourselves to gain. We're going to keep gaining as the post-pandemic recovery comes through. In another interview on BNN Bloomberg, sometime in April, he went on about how, there are millions of people getting government checks. And in some cases, they were getting more money than what their paycheck was. And they, went out and they opened Robinhood accounts and they started trading. And they basically were contributing to wild trading swings on the market. But the idea here of what he was trying to say is he was taking aim at individuals who were collecting unemployment checks.
All those people at home getting checks from the government, in some cases, they're getting more money than what the paycheck was. And a lot of those people have lots of time and some money, and they go and trade.
And it is ironic because he himself and his investment management company was receiving government subsidies.
Take me through how these hedge funds who saw their revenues go up were then able to collect government money that was meant to help save Canadian jobs.
Nothing about what these companies are doing is necessarily wrong. If they can justify any kind of revenue drop in a 4-week period, they can qualify for the wage subsidy. That is how the program is designed. It's so broad. So let's say you have 4 weeks in a row where you don't do well, and then you have 2 months where you have very strong performance, you still qualify for the subsidy. In a way, there's an argument to be made that if you're a public company, you are obligated to your shareholders to collect everything you possibly can in government help when you're entitled to it. One of the things about the way the stock market performed in the early months of the pandemic is when the world went into lockdown, stocks crashed and the market did very, very badly. And there was a time where you could say that wealth managers did suffer a revenue decline, and they definitely were entitled to the subsidy. The problem is that they ended up, wrapping up the year doing well. So then the question becomes, why did the government need to subsidize you when you just had a blip, a fleeting decline in your revenue, but you actually had a better 2020 than 2019? And the second flaw in the design of the program was that it didn't specifically say that you have to use the money to preserve jobs. And that is a massive problem because what some companies did, from what we found, is that they would collect this mass amount in a subsidy and they would record it as other income. So you don't know what they used that money for. They could have very well laid off workers, but there's nothing in the legislation when the wage subsidy program was enacted that said you need to target this. Like, we're going to come after you if you don't use this to protect jobs. A good example is the case of Bell, the telecommunications company. Bell laid off hundreds of workers, mostly in the media division, and they collected $122 million in a wage subsidy.
And how did these companies actually spend the money when they got it?
I'll give you an example. This trucking company, Montreal company, it's called TFI International. Their net income rose, by double digits. And it's because they cut their workforce to save money. And then they made a string of 13 acquisitions. They went on this huge spending spree to grow their company. And then they paid out a higher dividend to shareholders. And along the way, they collected $75 million in the wage subsidy.
How much money is this CEWS program going to cost Canadian taxpayers?
In the recent April budget, the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said that the program will cost $110 billion. That is the amount they have allocated to the program. They have spent $77 billion already, so the companies have kept $77 billion. And in the context of benefit programs in this country, it's quite remarkable that this program is the second largest benefits program this country has ever come up with. The only, program that is bigger than the wage subsidy program is the old age security payments program, which is about 121 billion. And to me, at least, a good point of comparison is how much the government allocated for CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was enacted to help individuals who lost their job because of COVID or, who was sick and got COVID. That program, they spent 71 billion. They converted it into a regular EI program after that. But you could argue, in effect, that individuals got less than businesses from the government during the pandemic.
So how has the government measured if this program actually worked and did what it was intended to do, and whether it was worth the money?
Yeah, so the government has given some indication of how the program, like the success of the program. They have said that it has saved 5 million jobs. Now, we don't know what kinds of jobs those are. Are they white-collar jobs? Are they blue-collar jobs? Are they temporary jobs, full-time jobs? Like, we have no detail on that. So, to be honest, gauging the success of the program has been quite complex.
So the government is getting questions about this. The NDP finance critic, Peter Julian, has asked our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, why companies were allowed to use the money for things like paying out dividends and bonuses, and they were allowed to lay off workers. What has the government said in response to these criticisms?
The government hasn't said much about the program, to be perfectly honest. When, Peter Julian questioned Chrystia Freeland about why companies receiving the wage subsidy were allowed to give out bonuses and boost executive compensation, she said the wage subsidy is only to be used to pay employees. The money cannot be used for any other purpose.
The wage subsidy can, by very clear and specific design, only be used to pay employees. That money cannot be used for any other purpose. That's something that it's very important for Canadians to know, and that's something that the government needs to be and is very, very careful about.
Now, remember, again, this was not what is stated in legislation. There is nothing that states the money has to be used to only pay employees. You're supposed to, but nothing stops companies from doing otherwise, and there's no punishment for it. Chrystia Freeland actually said the opposite. She said, it's important for companies to understand that legally the wage subsidy can only be used to pay employees. It cannot be used for other purposes. She said that, but that's not true.
So it sounds like Chrystia Freeland is putting the onus on companies to act according to the spirit of the program, which is about saving jobs. Where do you think the blame actually lies? Is it the design of the program, or is it the way that corporations are taking advantage of it?
So I think the blame is twofold. It lies with the design of the program that was too broad, and the fact that the government they could have said, like, okay, wait a minute, tech companies, for example, are turning out to have a brilliant 2020. They need to pay it back. And this is what some economists are very openly saying, like, you need to do what they did in the US. They had an equivalent program in the US called the Paycheck Protection Program. And essentially what that is it's a forgivable loan program. So if you do well, you pay the money back to the government. But if you don't, that's fine. The loan is forgiven. It is, of course, on corporations to not abuse the program. So if you're taking public money, it is probably very inappropriate to then dole out higher dividends to shareholders and, pay yourself more when, you're effectively using public money. But again, a corporation operates as a corporation. Its mandate is profit making. So, for me, you can't really blame them. You could design the program to make sure that there are no loopholes in it and they can't really take advantage of the breadth of the program.
So given that the government is aware of how the program is being used, are they planning to do anything about this?
The wage subsidy program is slated to wind up in September, but there was a tiny change introduced to the program last month. It was a clawback provision that placed limits on executive compensation. So companies that boosted the pay of their top executives in 2021 compared to 2019 will effectively have their wage subsidy clawed back by an equivalent amount of any kind of raise they gave their executives. It's a kind of acknowledgement that the government gets the idea that the program might have been too broad. But the measure comes into effect only on June 5th, and it's not retroactive. So that's important because if you've already doled out your bonuses, that's fine. You're not going to have to pay anything back to the government. And there is nothing else that they have, indicated they will change in the design of the program. They are launching a new program. It's a hiring subsidy program of sorts that's geared towards the pandemic recovery. And it's going to provide about $600 million to expand payroll. So it's to incentivize companies to hire. And the eligibility criteria is actually quite similar, except that public companies are not eligible.
Van, thank you so much for doing this and for all your great work on this.
Well, thanks so much, Tamara. I enjoyed coming on.
That's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandakar. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thanks to Vanmala Subramaniam. You can find her on Twitter at VanmalaS and read more about this investigation into Suze by Patrick Breathauer, David Milstead, and Tom Cardoso and Vanmala at globeandmail.com. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you want us to cover next or just say hello. You can email us at thedecibel@globeandmail.com and don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on Twitter at Anima_TK. And most importantly, wherever you listen to podcasts, please give us a follow. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.